My name is Maria, and for the past 12 years, I've worked as a senior project manager at Bennett Construction. At 45, I found my professional stride in a way I never expected after my divorce in my early 30s. Unlike many of my colleagues who complain about our hectic schedules and demanding clients, I thrive on the pressure. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing a project through from blueprints to ribbon cutting, a sense of permanence in a world where so little lasts. My condominium in downtown Portland isn't enormous, but it's mine, or at least it will be once I finish paying the mortgage. On days like today, when the late afternoon sun catches the river just right, I can stand on my balcony and see all the way to Mount Hood. The view reminds me how far I've come from those uncertain days after my marriage fell apart. This Friday evening, I was enjoying a rare moment of peace with a glass of Pinot Noir when my phone buzzed. Mom lit up my screen, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that her calls often triggered. Hey, Mom, I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I refilled my glass. The wine was a small indulgence, a reward for completing the medical center project 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Maria, honey, her voice had that forced cheerfulness that usually meant she wanted something. Even at 69, my mother Ellen hadn't changed her tactics. Listen, your father and I are having a family meeting next Saturday. Everyone will be there, and we need you to come too. I'll make your favorite lasagna, the one with the 3 cheeses and homemade sauce. My mom's lasagna was legendary, and she knew it was my weakness. I couldn't help but smile despite the undercurrent of manipulation I sensed. I'll be there, I said, wondering what this family meeting was really about. After we hung up, I walked back out to my balcony, wine glass in hand. It had been months since I'd seen my parents. Between my 60-hour work weeks and their busy retirement schedule of golf and community theater, our paths rarely crossed except for major holidays. The thought of seeing my younger siblings brought a mix of emotions. Kevin and Lisa, the twins, were 12 years younger than me. At 33, they were still finding themselves while I had rebuilt my entire life after my divorce at their age. I took a long sip of wine, remembering how different my upbringing had been from theirs. With me, it was all about responsibility, saving money, and being independent. By age 12, I was doing my own laundry. At 14, I became the twins' default babysitter whenever our parents wanted a night out. Meanwhile, Kevin and Lisa grew up with far fewer rules and considerably more indulgence. When I moved out at 18, they were still being tucked in at night. Now, at 33, they both lived in apartments our parents helped pay for while they found themselves. Kevin had cycled through 3 different college majors before settling on communications, and Lisa was currently between jobs after quitting her barista position because her manager was totally toxic. She spent most of her time trying to build her social media presence as an aspiring influencer, though her follower count remained stubbornly low. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across my living room. I finished my wine and wondered what exactly my parents wanted to discuss that required bribing me with my favorite meal. The following Saturday, the following Saturday, I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 4 p.m. Kevin's motorcycle and Lisa's bright blue Kia were already parked out front. Great, I was the last to arrive, which meant they'd probably been talking about me. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing a few stray strands of hair that had escaped my practical bob. The few gray hairs at my temples were more visible in the afternoon light, but I decided years ago to let them come naturally, one of many lessons from my divorce about accepting what I couldn't control. As I approached the front door, I could hear laughter from inside. It stopped abruptly when I rang the doorbell. Mom answered, wearing an apron and a slightly strained smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Maria, come in, come in. She gave me a quick hug that smelled of garlic and that expensive perfume Dad bought her every Christmas. At 72, my father still tried to impress her with gifts he could barely afford on his retirement income. The twins were sitting close together on the living room couch, their heads bent toward each other in conspiratorial fashion. When I walked in, they looked up simultaneously with identical expressions of forced casualness. Hey, Ria, Lisa said, twirling a strand of blonde hair around her finger. She still wore it long like she had in high school. Nice blazer, coming from work. It was Saturday, but I didn't bother correcting her assumption that I had no life outside the office. Instead, I nodded politely. Hi, Lisa. Kevin. I gave a small wave to my brother, who returned a half-hearted nod without getting up. I continued into the dining room where Mom was setting out the good china, the set we only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Dad was adjusting the silverware, making sure each piece was perfectly aligned. His hands trembled slightly, something I'd noticed more in recent years. Wow, bringing out the fancy stuff, I observed, trying to keep my tone light despite the growing sense of unease in my stomach. This must be some family meeting. Mom and Dad exchanged a quick glance that sent a ripple of apprehension through me. Whatever this was about, it wasn't good news. Your mother insisted, Dad said with a forced smile. You know how she is about presentations. Before I could ask what was going on, the twins sauntered in and took their usual seats across from me. Lisa immediately pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her Instagram feed while Kevin leaned back in his chair with that slightly bored expression he perfected in his teens. Dinner with the family. Throughout dinner, the conversation remained painfully superficial. Mom talked about her garden club and how they were planning a special display for the community center's anniversary celebration. Dad mentioned a new golf club he was considering, though I knew from our last conversation that his arthritis was making it harder for him to play. The twins shared gossip about people I didn't know from their circle of friends, exchanging knowing glances that excluded me from their private jokes. No one asked about my work or life, which wasn't unusual, but still stung after all these years. I'd just completed the biggest project of my career, a 6-story medical building that had earned praise from both the client and the architectural community. But in this house, my achievements had always been expected rather than celebrated. The lasagna was amazing, as promised, the rich layers of cheese and sauce melting on my tongue with each bite. But I couldn't fully enjoy it with the underlying tension in the room. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she served dessert, homemade tiramisu, another one of my favorites. The special meal, the good china, the nervous glances, all of it confirmed my suspicion that something significant was coming. Okay, I finally said, setting down my fork with a decisive clink against the china. What's going on? You're all acting strange, and Mom's made 2 of my favorite dishes. Just tell me what this is about. My parents exchanged another loaded glance before Dad cleared his throat and set down his napkin. The sound of it hitting the table seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Maria, you know we're getting older, he began, his voice carrying that formal tone he used when discussing serious matters. Your mother and I have been thinking about the future. Mom jumped in, her words coming out in a rush as if she'd rehearsed them. We've decided to finalize our will, and we wanted to tell you about it in person. Okay, I said cautiously, feeling my shoulders tense. Something in her tone sent warning signals through my body. We've decided, Dad continued, looking somewhere over my left shoulder rather than meeting my eyes, that the house and the lake cottage will go to Kevin and Lisa. The room went silent. I stared at my father, waiting for the rest, but he just looked at me expectantly. My heart began to pound loudly in my ears. And I finally asked, my voice sounding distant even to myself. That's it, Mom said, her voice oddly defensive. She twisted her wedding ring around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had as long as I could remember. You should understand, honey. You're doing so well financially, and the twins are still finding their way. They need the security more than you do. I looked across the table at my siblings. They were both trying, and failing, to suppress smug smiles. Kevin leaned forward, his elbows on the table in the exact way Mom had always scolded me for as a child. Just so we're clear, he said, his voice carrying a note of triumph that made my stomach clench. We wanted you to know now, so there's no confusion later. Everything goes to us. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. Everything? The house that I've been helping pay the mortgage on for the past 4 years? The cottage that I paid $30,000 to renovate last summer when the pipes burst? Mom's face flushed a deep crimson. That's not relevant, Maria. Family helps family, you know that. Yeah, family helps family, I repeated slowly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Like when I paid for both their college tuitions, or when I send you $600 every month for household expenses, or the $1,800 I've been sending monthly for your mortgage payments. My parents looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Dad suddenly became very interested in a spot on the tablecloth. Lisa snorted, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. Don't act all high and mighty, Rhea. You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad love us more. Excuse me? I felt my face growing hot, a familiar pressure building behind my eyes that I fought to control. It's true, Kevin added, crossing his arms over his chest. You've always resented us because you had to babysit while we got to have fun. It's not our fault you were born first. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me, to say something, anything, to contradict this ridiculous accusation. Instead, Mom's face hardened into the expression I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood whenever I questioned her decisions. You should be ashamed, Maria, she said, her voice cold. Talking about money at a family dinner. You've always been obsessed with counting every penny. Meanwhile, your brother and sister are struggling to find good jobs in this economy. And whose fault is that? I shot back, years of suppressed frustration bubbling to the surface. You've never made them take responsibility for anything. They can't keep jobs because they've never had to work for anything in their lives. See, Lisa said triumphantly, nudging her brother. Jealous and greedy. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. What I see is that I've been supporting this family for years while getting nothing but criticism in return. And now I find out you're cutting me out of the will entirely. For what? For being responsible? Dad stood up abruptly, his chair tipping backward and catching on the rug. I think you should leave, Maria. When you've calmed down and can discuss this rationally, we can talk again. I was stunned into silence as I gathered my purse and jacket from the hall closet, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the zipper. The twins smirked at me from across the room, their expressions identical in their smug satisfaction. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Kevin called after me as I yanked open the front door. This is our house now, not yours. The drive home. The drive home felt like an out-of-body experience. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but I barely registered the road in front of me. At 45, I thought I was past the point where my family could hurt me this deeply. I was wrong. By some miracle, I made it back to my condominium without incident. The security guard in the lobby nodded at me, but must have seen something in my expression that discouraged conversation. I was grateful for the silence as I rode the elevator to my floor. You're such an idiot, Maria, I muttered to myself as I kicked off my shoes in the entryway. My voice sounded hollow in the quiet apartment. Such a complete and utter fool. I went straight to my wine rack and grabbed a bottle of Cabernet, not the cheap stuff I usually save for cooking, but the expensive one I'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, finding out your family has been using you like an ATM seemed special enough. As I poured myself a generous glass, memories flooded back, washing over me like a bitter tide. All those times I'd helped them financially over the years. 3 years ago, when Kevin totaled his first car, I gave him $5,000 for a down payment on a new one because he needs reliable transportation for school. Last year, when Lisa decided she wanted to become a yoga instructor, I paid for her $2,500 certification program, only to watch her abandon it after 2 weeks because it was too much negative energy. Then there was the $30,000 I spent renovating the lake cottage after a pipe burst and caused water damage, a cottage I've used exactly twice in the 4 years since my parents bought it. But the biggest expenditure by far was covering their house payments. 4 years ago, right after my divorce was finalized and I was finally getting back on my feet, my parents were looking to downsize from our old family home. They fell in love with their current place but struggled with the monthly payments on their retirement income. They took out the mortgage themselves. But right after I got my promotion to senior project manager, they asked if I could help them with the payments. Just until we get settled, Mom had said, her eyes wide with that look that always made me feel guilty for even considering saying no. You know how your father worries about money. So for the past 4 years, I've been sending them $1,800 every month to cover their mortgage, plus the additional $600 I sent them each month for utilities and property taxes. That's $2,400 a month, I said aloud, doing the math as I paced across my living room. For 4 years. The total made me wince and take another large swallow of wine. Almost $115,000 I'd given them, and for what? To be told I wasn't getting anything in the will because I was doing well financially. I took my wine to the couch and stared out at the city lights. The Portland skyline glittered against the night sky, beautiful and distant like the dreams I'd put on hold to support my family. The truth was, I wasn't even that interested in inheriting their house or the cottage. What hurt was the dismissive way they'd announced it, as if my contributions meant nothing, as if I meant nothing. And using my favorite meal as a bribe, that was just manipulative. I remembered how excited I'd been when Mom mentioned the lasagna, like Pavlov's dog salivating at the bell. Well, no more. I opened my banking app and stared at the scheduled transfers. $1,800 to Mom and Dad mortgage scheduled for the 15th and $600 to parents' expenses for the first of each month. With a deep breath, I canceled both recurring payments. My finger trembled slightly as I pressed confirm, but as soon as I did, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders. Then I turned off my phone, finished my wine, and went to bed. For the first time in years, I fell asleep thinking about my future rather than my family's needs. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Sunlight streamed through the blinds I'd forgotten to close, and instead of my usual Sunday morning rush to check emails and plan the week ahead, I stayed in bed, savoring the simple pleasure of having nowhere to be. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about setting aside a huge chunk of my paycheck for my parents. I could actually start saving aggressively for my own future, maybe even take that trip to Italy I'd been dreaming about since college. My financial advisor had been telling me for years that I needed to boost my retirement savings, and now I finally could. I made myself a proper breakfast, eggs, toast, and fresh coffee, instead of my usual granola bar eaten over the sink. As I ate, I scrolled through travel websites on my tablet, allowing myself to imagine walking through Roman piazzas and Tuscan vineyards. By the time I finished my second cup of coffee, I'd bookmarked 3 potential itineraries. I spent the next 2 weeks throwing myself into work, staying late at the office, and bringing projects home on weekends. The Bennett Medical Center project was in its final phase, and I found genuine satisfaction in focusing on something I was good at, something that appreciated my contributions. My phone remained blissfully silent, no calls or texts from my family. It was as if our confrontation had never happened, which suited me fine. Then, exactly 14 days after the disastrous dinner, I received a text from my mother. Maria, don't forget the mortgage payment is due today. Also, we need the household money by Friday. The electric bill is higher this month. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips. Was she serious? After everything that had happened, she was still expecting me to send money as if cutting me out of the will and insulting me to my face was just business as usual? The audacity was breathtaking. I set my cup down carefully, took a deep breath, and typed a response. I won't be making any more payments for the mortgage or bills. I'm not going to financially support a house that you've made clear I have no stake in. Please make other arrangements. I hit send and set my phone down, my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. Within 15 minutes, it rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but decided it was better to deal with this now. I took another deep breath and answered. How dare you? She shrieked, skipping any greeting. Her voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You can't just stop paying without warning. What are we supposed to do? Hello to you too, Mom, I said, keeping my voice calm despite the tremor I felt in my hands. And I'm giving you warning now. I won't be making any more payments. You can't do this to us. We're your parents. You have an obligation. The pitch of her voice kept rising with each sentence. Actually, I interrupted, surprised by my own firmness. I've been helping voluntarily because I thought we were a family who supported each other. But after learning that you and Dad are leaving everything to Kevin and Lisa, I realize this arrangement isn't fair to me. This is about the will, she huffed. I knew it. You're just greedy and jealous. Your father and I raised you better than this. No, Mom. This is about respect. I've spent years helping all of you financially, and in return, I get cut out of the will and insulted at dinner. I'm done being the family piggy bank." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I sat down heavily on the couch, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Part of me was horrified at what I'd done. The dutiful daughter I'd been my whole life was screaming in protest. But another part, a stronger part, felt something close to exhilaration. The calls started coming in almost immediately, first my mother again, then my father, then both twins. I let them all go to voicemail. Their messages ranged from tearful pleas to vicious insults. "Maria, please," Dad begged in one message, his voice sounding older and more fragile than I'd ever heard it. "We can't make the mortgage without you. We'll lose the house." "You selfish bitch," Kevin snarled in another. "Mom's crying because of you. Hope you're happy." Lisa's message was filled with such creative profanity that under different circumstances, I might have been impressed by her vocabulary. After 2 days of this, I blocked all their numbers. I needed peace. A week later, my phone started ringing with calls from relatives I barely spoke to. First my Aunt Mary, then my cousin Steve, even my father's brother who lived in Arizona and whom I hadn't seen in person since my college graduation. Apparently, my mother had been busy spreading her version of events through the family grapevine. "Your mom says you're trying to make them homeless," Aunt Mary said when I finally answered one of her calls. Her voice held none of the accusation I expected, just genuine confusion. "What's going on, honey?" I took a deep breath and explained the situation, the will, the dinner, and most importantly, the fact that I'd been paying their mortgage for 4 years without anyone in the family knowing. "That can't be right," she said, sounding genuinely confused. "Your mom told everyone you just helped them with the down payment." "I paid every single mortgage payment since they bought the house," I replied, feeling a strange calm as I stated the facts. "Plus extra for bills. You can ask them yourself." Similar conversations followed with other relatives. Some sided with me, particularly my cousins who had experienced their own versions of family favoritism. Others sided with my parents, insisting that children should support their parents regardless of circumstances. A few relatives refused to believe I'd been financially supporting my parents at all, insisting I was lying to make myself look better. Fed up with the whispers and accusations, I finally posted a detailed explanation on Facebook, laying out the financial support I'd provided over the years and why I decided to stop. I didn't mention specific dollar amounts, that felt too personal, but I was clear about the extent of my support and the lack of appreciation. I ended my post with, "I love my family, but I can't keep subsidizing their lifestyle while being treated as an outsider. It's time for me to prioritize my own future." The post generated dozens of supportive comments, but also plenty of criticism. Some relatives thought I was wrong to air family business publicly. Others suggested I should keep paying the mortgage regardless of the will situation because they're still your parents. My cousin Emily, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, sent me a private message saying she'd gone through something similar with her brothers and offered to meet for coffee. The mixed reactions bothered me less than I expected. At 45, I was finally learning that I couldn't control what others thought of me. I could only control my own actions and responses. A month passed without any contact from my immediate family. I'd started to think maybe they'd finally accepted my decision and moved on. Work was busy as usual, and I was finally enjoying the financial freedom of not supporting 4 extra adults. I'd even put a deposit down on that trip to Italy I'd been dreaming about for years. The travel agent had promised me a room with a view of the Arno River in Florence. Business trip to Sacramento. It was a Tuesday when I got the assignment to oversee a project in Sacramento. The company had just completed construction on a medical office building, and they needed someone to handle the final inspections and client walkthrough. "It's just 3 days," my boss assured me as he handed over the file. "You'll fly out Wednesday morning and be back Friday night. I know it's short notice, but Davis called in sick, and you're the only one I trust with this client." I felt a small glow of pride at his confidence in me. After 20 years in this industry, it was nice to have my expertise recognized. I packed lightly, just a carry-on suitcase with the essentials and my laptop. The trip went smoothly, almost suspiciously so. The client was thrilled with the building, The inspections passed with only minor issues to address, and I even managed to enjoy a nice dinner at a local restaurant recommended by the concierge at my hotel. By Friday afternoon, I was on a flight back home, feeling accomplished and ready for a relaxing weekend. I'd planned to spend Saturday browsing furniture stores for a new dining set, another small luxury I could now afford without worrying about my family's financial needs. When I finally arrived at my apartment building around 8 p.m., the first thing I noticed was that something looked off about my door. From down the hallway, as I got closer, my stomach dropped. The entire door frame was covered in expanding foam, the kind that hardens into a solid mass. Someone had deliberately sprayed it all around my door, making it impossible to insert my key or open it from the outside. What the hell? I muttered, setting down my suitcase and touching the foam. It was completely hardened, like concrete. There was no way I was getting into my apartment without professional help. I pulled out my phone and called the building's emergency maintenance number, but got voicemail. Next, I tried the building manager, Mitchell, who answered on the fourth ring. Mitchell, this is Maria Mitchell from Unit 1203, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger and fear coursing through me. Someone vandalized my apartment door. They sprayed it with expanding foam. I can't get in. There was a pause on the other end. That's unusual, he finally said, and I could hear the concern in his voice. I'll call our locksmith service, but it might be a couple of hours before they can get there. It's Friday night. I ended up sitting in the hallway next to my luggage for nearly 3 hours before a sleepy-looking locksmith arrived with his tools. He whistled when he saw my door. Someone really didn't want you getting in, he observed as he assessed the damage. This is going to be tricky. I've never seen anything quite like this. It took him almost an hour to cut away enough of the foam to access the lock mechanism. By midnight, I was finally able to enter my apartment, exhausted and furious. The locksmith's assessment of the damage was grim. You're going to need a whole new door and frame, he told me. This foam, once it sets, it bonds to the surface. You can cut it away, but it leaves damage. I'd estimate about $3,000 for a complete replacement. After he left, I went straight to my laptop. I had installed a security camera in my hallway after a package had been stolen 6 months earlier. The camera was aimed directly at my front door and uploaded footage to a cloud server I could access remotely. With shaking hands, I logged in and found the relevant time frame. At first, there was nothing, just an empty hallway. Then, around 2 p.m. on Thursday, a familiar figure appeared. Kevin, my brother, was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and had his hoodie up, but I'd recognize his walk anywhere. He looked both ways down the hallway, then pulled a can from his backpack and began spraying the foam around my door frame. He worked methodically, making sure to cover every inch of the lock and the seam where the door met the frame. When he was done, he stepped back to admire his work, then hurried away. I watched the footage 3 times, my anger building with each viewing. This wasn't just petty revenge. This was criminal vandalism, and it would cost thousands to repair properly. More than that, it was a violation of my home, my sanctuary. In that moment, something hardened inside me, like the foam around my door. At the police station, the next morning, I took the video footage to the local police station and filed a formal complaint against my brother. I'd spent a restless night wrestling with the decision, but ultimately concluded that this time, family loyalty had to take a backseat to personal boundaries. Somewhere along the way, my family had lost all respect for those boundaries, and it was time for consequences. The officer who took my statement was a woman about my age, with tired eyes and a patient expression that suggested she'd heard every kind of family dispute possible. Do you have any idea why he would do this? She asked as she typed my information into her computer. Financial disputes, I said simply. I didn't feel like explaining my entire family drama to a stranger, the years of support, the will, the ultimatums. The emotional weight of it all felt too heavy to unpack in this sterile interview room with its fluorescent lights and faint smell of coffee. The officer nodded and continued typing. We'll have someone contact him for questioning. In the meantime, do you have somewhere safe to stay if you're concerned about your safety? I'll be fine, I said, perhaps too quickly. I've changed my locks, and the building has security cameras and a doorman. I just want him held accountable for the damage. 3 days later, I received a call from the same officer. Ms. Mitchell, we brought your brother in for questioning. He initially denied everything, but when we showed him the video footage, he admitted to vandalizing your door. Good, I said, feeling a grim satisfaction that surprised me. What happens now? We've charged him with criminal mischief and property damage. Given the cost of repairs, it's a more serious charge. He could be looking at fines and possibly probation. I thanked her and hung up. Almost immediately, my phone rang again. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway, half expecting it to be someone from the police department with additional questions. Maria, what have you done? It was my father, his voice trembling with rage. The police arrested Kevin, your own brother. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the kitchen counter. They didn't arrest him, Dad. They brought him in for questioning after I filed a complaint about him vandalizing my apartment. He's just a kid. He made a mistake. My father's voice cracked with emotion. He's 33 years old, I replied flatly, surprised by my own calmness. And his mistake is going to cost over $3,000 to fix properly. The building manager says they'll have to replace the entire door and frame. This is how you treat family? By calling the police on them? Family doesn't vandalize each other's homes, Dad, I said, feeling a surge of righteous anger. Family doesn't destroy property or try to lock someone out of their own apartment. There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice lower, but no less intense. What do we need to do to make this go away? $3,000 for the repairs, I said immediately. Pay for what he destroyed, and I'll withdraw the complaint. That's extortion. He sputtered. That's consequences, I corrected him. Kevin destroyed my property, and now he needs to pay for it, or he can deal with the legal system. His choice. My father hung up without another word. I set the phone down on the counter and noticed my hands were shaking. Standing up to my family was still new territory, and the adrenaline left me feeling both empowered and exhausted. The next day, my mother called. Unlike my father, she didn't yell. Instead, her voice was cold and cutting, like ice against skin. I never thought you'd sink this low, she said, using the police to get revenge on your own family. It's not revenge, Mom, I said, moving to my balcony where the fresh air and city view always helped me think more clearly. It's holding Kevin accountable for his actions. He was upset. We all are. You've left us struggling to make ends meet after we relied on your help for so long. The mortgage company is threatening foreclosure. I bit back a sarcastic response about poor planning and entitlement. I'm sorry you're having financial difficulties, but that doesn't give Kevin the right to vandalize my home. She was quiet for a moment. And if we pay, you'll drop the charges? Yes, I confirmed. Fine, she said tersely. We'll send you the money, but don't expect anything else from us ever again. I nearly laughed at the irony. That was already made perfectly clear at our family dinner, Mom. The transfer and moving forward, 2 days later, I received a bank transfer for exactly $3,000. No message, no apology, just the money. I contacted the police and told them I didn't want to press charges anymore. The officer sounded disappointed but said she understood. Family situations can be complicated, she said sympathetically. You have no idea, I replied, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. With the money from my parents, I was able to get my door properly repaired. The building manager was understanding but suggested I might want to consider additional security measures. I've been here 15 years, he said as he inspected the new installation, and I've never seen anything like that foam trick. Whoever did it really wanted to cause problems. I nodded, not bothering to explain that it was my own brother. I'll take your advice, I said, and later that week, I upgraded my camera system and added a second lock just to be safe. 6 months have passed since I last had any direct contact with my immediate family. According to Aunt Mary, who still calls me every few weeks, my parents are struggling badly with their mortgage. They've depleted most of their retirement savings trying to keep up with the payments. Your mom's waitressing at that diner near their house, she told me during our last call, her voice tinged with concern. Morning shifts, and your father's working at the hardware store 6 days a week now. They're barely making ends meet. I felt a momentary pang of guilt, but then remembered how quickly they'd written me off after years of my support. What about Kevin and Lisa? I asked, already knowing the answer. Not helping at all, Mary confirmed with a sigh. Kevin picked up a retail job but quit after 3 weeks because the manager was totally unreasonable about him showing up on time. Lisa occasionally babysits for neighbors but spends most of her days planning a lifestyle blog that never seems to launch. The worst part, she continued, is that your parents still blame you for everything. Your mom tells anyone who listens that you abandoned them when they needed you most. I just smiled and changed the subject to Mary's upcoming knee surgery. I no longer care what they say about me. Epilogue. My life has never been better. I got promoted to senior director last month with a substantial raise. I took that trip to Italy, a 21-day journey through Rome, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast, and have another vacation planned to Japan in the spring. My condominium now has a proper home office where I can work in peace, and I've redecorated the living room with furniture I actually love rather than pieces I settled for because they were affordable. I've made new friends through my hiking group, and I've been dating someone interesting for the past 2 months. A landscape architect I met at a client dinner who makes me laugh and doesn't keep score of favors or affection. Last week, I met with my financial advisor to increase my retirement contributions. You're in great shape now, she told me, reviewing my portfolio. If you keep this up, you'll be able to retire comfortably at 60 if you want to. As I walked home from her office, I realized what a gift my family had inadvertently given me. By cutting me out of their will and their lives, they had forced me to prioritize myself for the first time. The painful truth was that I hadn't really been part of the family for years. I'd just been their financial support system. Now, at 45, I finally understand that family isn't just about blood relations or obligation. It's about mutual respect, appreciation, and genuine care. I'm building that kind of family now, one friendship and authentic connection at a time. For the first time in my adult life, my money is my own, my time is my own, my future is my own, and it feels like freedom.